So it was a number of years ago, probably more like decades ago. I remember watching with my sister the debate. It was a couple of candidates running for president of the United States. And I remember watching it because, in part, as soon as it was over, my sister shared with me how blown away she was that her candidate had so clearly won the debate. And I remember being flabbergasted by that because the candidate I had supported, to me, had obviously won the debate. And what struck me as I watched that and as we talked about that, what struck me was how much our affiliation, how much the sense in which we connect ourselves to a particular tribe, how much that shapes how we perceive the world, right? Same event, two very different outcomes. Now, what's interesting is these days, my sister and I, by consensus, don't talk politics. I know some of you in your own families probably find that true as well. But what strikes me is how the particular tribes we identify with, particularly political tribes, we find ourselves seeing the world differently, and yet here we are, my sister and I, from the same family tribe, yet find ourselves very different from each other. And in some ways, unable to connect. And I guess I can say that all of us probably can relate these days. There's a recent book just came out this summer by a political scientist. I believe it's called From Politics to Pew. And the interesting assertion of this political scientist is the common understanding or the common thinking we have about religion and politics is that our religious points of view are what shape our political points of view. And that's how we often think of it. And she says, through research and study and interviews, that that's not actually the full story. The truth is, she says, is that our political points of view shape what we believe religiously. It's interesting because I think one could generally say that the nature of the culture in society, the very partisan culture in society we live in these days, is that we probably identify more with our political tribe than we do with our religious one. In the church, which should be this space and place in which that isn't necessarily driving who we are as a people, we tend to go to those churches that share our own political tribe, an echo chamber as well. Startling to think about. But I'm not so sure it hasn't always been a struggle in the church. The divisions that existed thousands of years ago, divisions that exist today. And I love this line from Paul, the line in which he says, the line he says, we must no longer be children, he says. We must no longer be children who tossed to and fro, blown about by every wind of doctrine, whether that doctrine be political or theological. We must no longer be children tossed to and fro, blown about by doctrine. So this morning, I asked Morris and Betty Dyer. Morris and Betty are here because Betty's going to speak to you a minute from mission on our relationship to El Salvador. They're glad to know that they're not going to be here talking about which political party they belong to. But actually, what we're going to talk about for a few minutes is an essential question: can we cross and be united despite the different tribes we are a part of? And part of understanding that context is that Morris, who has been a past moderator of the Presbytery of Des Moines, and Betty, who is the office manager, invaluable office manager for the Presbytery of Des Moines, have just returned from our sister communities in El Salvador, communities that we relate to as a church as well. And they've been there 9 times. And so I asked if they'd be willing, and they were incredibly brave to do this, if we could engage in a brief discussion about what unites us across those tribes we identify with. And in this particular conversation, what divides us when our tribe might be our country, the United States versus El Salvador, what divides us if our tribe is race, or if our tribe is the social economic tribe we're a part of, and how that relates to these campesinos and communities in El Salvador. So I asked Morris and Betty to share, if they could, some of their experiences in El Salvador, both the challenges of connecting to a different tribe, but also share a little bit about what unites them in the midst of that. So.
Well, I'm Morris. Should be pretty clear. And I'm a Presbyterian, so that gives you a pretty good idea of what political bent I am. But this is a mission unlike any other mission that I've ever experienced. Betty and I were youth directors at our church. We're members of Trinity United Presbyterian Church in Indianola. And we were youth directors for 14 years. We went on 10 work trips. We had an opportunity with our youth to visit various communities and do what everybody expects that happens on a mission trip. We built things, we fixed things, we painted things, we repaired things, we did all the work that you would expect to happen during a work trip. But this trip to El Salvador, these trips to El Salvador, is entirely different. It's a mission not built upon the gringos coming in and saying, oh, this is what you need to do, this is what you need, and by the way, we're going to do it for you. This is an opportunity for us to have to stand side by side with our brothers and our sisters, to hear what they have to say, the troubles that they're experiencing, the challenges that they're facing in their environment, in their communities, and to be in a position to be able to provide maybe some assistance that allows them, under the self-direction, to be able to move forward in their own communities. Betty was the one that got me started on this. Your first little trip?
Well, my first trip, ironically, was with Mary McKenzie, who's sitting right here, because they were members at our church at that point in time. And I was the proverbial deer in the headlights. I followed along behind everybody else that had already been there. And I had to learn this because I'd already been sitting in the presbytery chair for 3 years, communicating with Bob Cook in El Salvador, with the pastoral team in El Salvador, and wiring all the funds down that people and churches were giving. I needed to go learn about this, and so I did, following along, just saying, they'd push me in the right direction, say, go here, and I'd go, okay. And so I did, and I learned what it was like to not go on a mission trip and build things and paint things, as Morris said. I learned right away how important it was to just sit there and listen and sit beside them and be with them.
It provides them an opportunity to make the decisions based upon what's best for their community. There's a directiva, kind of like a city council form of government. And the directiva then, in conversations with the various community members, determine what needs they might have. Most of the communities that we are in partnership with are communities out, like rural communities that they used to have years ago in Iowa. And they're comprised primarily of subsistence farmers. The crops they raise simply feed them for the year, and maybe with a little bit of help, they might have a little extra that they can sell for a little bit of income. The challenges that they have then are to determine what's going to be best for the community. And then when that decision is made, then they together as a community, as a group, put together a solicitude asking for a consideration of financial support for that particular program. Many times it's just simply for fertilizer. Other times it's for water tanks or for latrines or for scholarships or for community centers, which are simply 4 posts with a metal roof on the top of it. One of the interesting things that happens when you develop a long-term relationship is that you begin to understand the needs that they express are going to help them be able to move forward in their own communities, to be able to speak with a unified voice with the government, and maybe be able to get some water delivered to their communities, maybe have electricity introduced into their communities. And it's the ability to have those decisions, to make those decisions, that comes from the fact that we are standing side by side with them to give them validation as a human being. The most precious gift that we can offer somebody else is our presence. Think about that. Think about what it means to have somebody beside you at times when are difficult. Think what it means to have somebody beside you when when you're celebrating. You don't want to celebrate by yourself. What's the most important thing that you can do for somebody else is to be present. And that's what we're doing in this particular situation in El Salvador. We're being present. We're allowing people to understand that they're important enough that we're going to visit them. Sometimes we've heard somebody say, you know, the mayor of our community doesn't come and visit me. The president of my country doesn't come and visit me. But you've come all the way from the United States to visit me, to come to my house, to be here, to walk inside the door. That's what the challenge is of being one when we're so different, when we don't speak the language, is simply to be there, to be present, and to allow that trust to take place.
And I appreciate that one of the ways that you framed that was very much reflected in the letter that Paul wrote, which is in all humility, that we're coming to be present not because we have the answers, not because our opinion matters the most, but to actually be in relationship, even though we don't speak the same language.
Yeah, the different tribes, quote, in this particular case are those of us that still can't speak Spanish even after 9 trips, and the folks there that can't speak English even after, you know, many visitors have come. But at the same time, we can sit in the same room, either with the pastoral team, the local volunteers that have been there and doing this much longer than we have, or sitting in one of our communities with the local folks there. It doesn't matter that we can't speak the same language. We may have an interpreter, and it's usually your own Kathy Bassett who's doing it, who did it last week when we were there. But it doesn't matter. We're all there with the same goal, to love each other and to work together and to cross those divides. We laugh and we joke even though we can't understand what we're saying, because Kathy will figure it out for us and tell us. And then we all laugh together because we've come together to be together, because that's what's really, really important.
Now, Morris, I know you have a story that was particularly meaningful to you.
One of the things that we do when we go to our communities is we go make a door-to-door visit. We take a gift, about $35 worth of materials. They're staples. They're cooking oil, rice, salt, soaps, all sorts of things that people might just use during a month's time. It costs $35. The average income in El Salvador is $1 a day if you have a job. So most of these people are receiving this gift, don't have a job. They're relying on income from their corn that they're trying to raise. So here's $35, 1 month's salary, a gift for the people. And we delivered it to Ernesto. Ernesto is a caretaker, single caretaker, about 72 years old, living on a place to take care of it. And our delegation had gone on to the next place. We'd already delivered our gift to Ernesto. And I'm standing by Ernesto, and of course, well, actually, Ernesto is quite a bit lower than I am. And I look down at Ernesto, and his eyes are rimmed with moisture. And I look down at Ernesto, and he simply does this simple thing. Ernesto doesn't speak any English. I don't speak any Spanish except how to get to the bathroom. But Ernesto looks up at me, and he taps his chest 3 times with his right hand. He reaches over to me and taps my chest with his right hand 3 times. Puts his hands together, clasps them, and looks up to heaven. Looks to me with tears in his eyes, and we pass. We pass each other, and we go our separate ways after a hug. That's crossing tribal lines. That's one with God. That's one in the Spirit. That's what makes this mission, which is your mission, all that more powerful, because we are one body. We are doing God's work. We are making a difference in one small section of God's world. That's what this is about.